Here, read this.
Woof.
So here are 5 books that I've read recently. The first is Uproar by Alice Loxton. This came out last year, and it is about caricaturists in Georgian England. Although we do at one point stray over the border and have a quick cameo from my favourite caricaturist, John Kay, in Scotland, just a one-line cameo. But principally we're in England and we are focusing on the caricaturists James Gilray, Thomas Rowlandson, and Isaac Cruikshank, later Cruikshank's son, who takes over the family business. This is a study of their lives and also the political sway these caricaturists commanded. Their caricatures of politicians like Pitt the Younger and also the monarch George III and his infamous son, the Prince Regent, really had a huge impact on the way that people thought about these figures, and it had a huge impact on how these caricaturists were remembered later on, or misremembered, forgotten, deliberately scrubbed from the record books. Probably the most telling example of this would be James Gilray's caricatures of Napoleon. This is during the Napoleonic Wars. It was Gilray who first caricatured Napoleon as being short, cementing in the public mind the idea that Napoleon was dwarfish, despite the fact that he historically had a fairly average height. Napoleon was later reported as saying that he would rather have faced however many English generals than James Gilray. So effective was this campaign of his caricatures. I found the book really entertaining. It's a story not just of satire and scandal, as the subtitle promises, but also the evolution of caricature, the departure from a sort of Hogarthian realism into a more exaggerated style of drawing, and the artistic debate as well as the political debates that these caricatures produced. It's also a story that needs to be told. Caricaturists like Gilray and Cruikshank and Rowlandson had a huge effect on not just modern day cartoonists, but British humour, British political commentary. And partly because they were so effective and dangerous, their memories have been forgotten by the Victorian Puritanism that followed them. So it's great to have their story told in a popular work of non-fiction. Personally, I could have done without the relentless pop culture references, contemporary references that Loxton works in. Feels like barely a page goes by without some sort of reference to this is like the Georgian version of X Factor, or so and so was the Banksy of his day. I felt at times the influence of a publisher or an editor keen to make this book on the Georgian period accessible as possible to the kids. Loxton is well known for her Instagram and other online content. She's a very popular internet historian, and she's a good writer too, and I think her not only her subject matter but her writing, when she stuck to the Georgian period, was good enough to just not need a kind of a reference to X Factor or TikTok being crowbarred in. But overall, very entertaining book, and if you're into caricature, if you're into cartoonists, or if you're into that period, it's well worth a read. Next up, we have Time Stood Still. I have a physical copy here. This is by Paul Cohen-Portheim. It's just been reissued by Boiler House Press. This was originally originally published in 1931. It's a memoir. Paul Cohen-Portheim was a German living in England when he was arrested and put into a civilian internment camp for the duration of the war. I found this book absolutely fascinating. I didn't really know much about UK civilian internment camps before I read it. And if that's the same for you, then this will be a real education. The UK had the largest World War I internment camp during World War I. It was called Knockalow Camp, and it was on the Isle of Man. It held over 23,000 civilian prisoners during the course of the war. Cohen-Portheim spends roughly half of his internment there, and the rest of it in another camp in Wakefield. So on that count, it's an important history lesson, an eye-opening one, but it's also worth recommending for the uniqueness of Cohen-Portheim's attitude and character. I've actually written a review of this book, and if it's out now, I'll link it in the episode description box, or I'll come back and link it. In that review, I compared Cohen-Portheim to a character out of a Nabokov novel. He is a very artistic person. When he is arrested, he is designing costumes for Carmen that he will never, unfortunately, get to see because he is put straight into the camps. But he's also a painter. And what's extraordinary about the book is the extent to which his active inner life sustains him during the course of his incarceration. I think it will strike a chord with a lot of people in 2024 who, perhaps during the course of the pandemic along with the struggle and the isolation and the uncertainty and the ill health and everything else, found some kind of new lease of life with either their creative side or some other kind of solitary project. It's enough to make Cohen-Portheim worry that he's going to sugarcoat the whole experience. He doesn't. This isn't some kind of like sort of garishly jolly sideways look at internment or anything. You come away with a very strong sense of the utter futility of life for these inmates. He describes them as, remember, they're civilian inmates, so that it's not as if they have had some experience of war. They have a sophisticated idea of what the enemy is. They know what to expect from POW camps. These are civilians who are given an indefinite sentence and told to do absolutely nothing. Their lives are just placed on hold. They are not given any information. They have a dim sense of the events outside the camp. An utterly maddening and terrible existence. A life in which, as Cohen-Portheim says, the only real enemy is time. It is something that needs to be killed, hence the title, Time Stood Still. But what's mesmerizing about the book is not the horror of it and the futility of it, but the fact that despite all odds, despite the fact that his fellow inmates end up kind of sleepwalking through existence for 4 years, Cohen-Portheim relentlessly and doggedly pursues the development of the self that is being suppressed in everyone around him. Everyone else is sort of subsumed into this aggregate entity of all of the prisoners, the camp as a whole. Meanwhile, Cohen-Portheim his painting is evolving, he is exploring mysticism, he's writing, and I just found that incredibly moving. And despite the fact that it's a memoir of World War I internment, I think his reflections on captivity have a universality to them. I think I'd be willing to bet that as you read this, you'll be thinking of perhaps the pandemic, but stories of captivity in the news today. But even more general than that, all manner of impositions on freedom that the modern world places on us. Really, really an extraordinary book. Highly recommend. So the next one is Macbeth, or Macbeth Retold, by Jo Nesbo. This came out in 2018. It's part of the Hogarth series, which is a series of novels that reimagine Shakespeare plays in new settings. A series which, despite how tempting and tantalizing a prospect that is, I have found to be really, really below par for the most part. The worst one by far, in my view, is Margaret Atwood's Tempest Riff, Hagseed, a genuinely dreadful book. This was quite different in that it was the first one I've read that really tries to radically change the genre of a play. The others can all be sort of slotted into contemporary literary fiction. This one is a police procedural Macbeth. It's set in a kind of alternative 70s Scotland. Like Atwood's dreadful Hagseed, magic is replaced by drugs. It's a weird one, this book. I've been wondering about how to talk about it. For the first quarter, maybe a fifth, it seemed like it was going to be the most gloriously silly fast food type of read you could imagine. It was like Macbeth done as if it was Lethal Weapon. Everyone is just a sort of beat-up cop with a past. All of the transpositions from Shakespeare's original to Nesbo's book were so delightfully silly. So, like, the Norwegian army at the start of Macbeth is turned into bikers called the Norse Riders. Lady Macbeth is a casino owner called, wait for it, Lady. And everything was just over-the-top violence and kind of campy fun. But then it just keeps going, and it takes itself increasingly more seriously, despite the ridiculous things happening. Yeah, the promise of the opening few chapters soon sputtered out. There were too many moments where Nesbo tried to directly port across famous speeches or lines from Shakespeare's Macbeth, and they just sound like Cliff Notes or one of those Shakespeare in simple prose books. Bring forth men, children only becomes, you can only give birth to boys, can't you? Which is not only not what Macbeth means in Shakespeare's play, but just so clumsy and dumb. Someone gets called a Romeo at one point because he's a lover boy, which just feels incredibly weird to do in a Shakespeare adaptation. The witches are Asian prostitutes, one of whom is transsexual, which feels like a deeply dubious choice. But the signal detail from Nesbo's Macbeth is that the drug that everyone's hooked on, Macbeth is an ex-junkie, which I actually thought that we are told that early on, and I thought that could be quite good. The drug that he's hooked on, made by the stand-in for the witches, is called brew. The drug is called brew. Nesbo, obviously worried that this wasn't stupid enough, comes up with another drug about halfway through the book, a new, even more intoxicating drug called power. Power, it turns out, corrupts. Some men are addicted to power. You know that thing when people say your argument isn't even wrong? Making a drug and calling it power is sort of not even crap. What I can say for Macbeth Retold is it made me laugh, which none of the other Hogarth Shakespeares have done. And I think as a model, it's better than just finding a middlebrow literary fiction author and say, use a Shakespeare play as your next template, because they already do that badly. Find a genre fiction author and just say, do your usual thing, use these characters and see what you come up with. I think it didn't work in this case because I don't think Nesbo's a very good writer. Set your stall a bit higher. Pick a genre fiction author, and I think the Hogarth series might improve. But yeah, we'll see. Not great. Probably the one book from today that I wouldn't recommend. Next, Poor Things by Alisdair Gray. This first came out in 1992. Much in the news at the moment with the new film adaptation. I read this just before I went to see the film. I'm going to reserve my opinions on the film for another video. I'm just going to talk to you about the book. But I want to quickly say that my interest in rereading Poor Things was also ignited by a fantastic documentary made by a new-ish YouTube channel called Ossian. I will link that below. They made a brilliant documentary about Alisdair Gray and his archive in Glasgow, and took as their jumping off point the fact that the film Poor Things doesn't use Glasgow. The Glasgow portion of the book is moved rather disappointingly to London. This documentary made by Ossian will explain what's wrong with that and also give you a sense of Alisdair Gray's Glasgow. So Poor Things is the story of a Glasgow surgeon who reanimates the body of a 25-year-old woman. It's superficially a Frankenstein story, but it's infused with all kinds of other Gothic and Scottish tales, everything from Confessions of a Justified Sinner to Jekyll and Hyde. Our narrator is very much like an Utterson sort of figure, someone who is involved in the plot, but kind of looking on to the central scientific breakthrough. And it's such a wonderful book. I'd forgotten how wonderful it is. This is one of those books that feels like a little Bible in itself, or a little map with interconnected stories, layers of footnotes that complicate and contradict things and tease it into the real world in all kinds of interesting ways that really lend a lot of credence to the argument of the Ossian documentary, because it is a story that is tied to the real history of Glasgow in a way that you might miss at first glance, in a way that I'd kind of forgotten. I'd remembered the central tale, the strapline version of the story, and I'd remembered it was funny. I'd forgotten the finer details and the range of sort of literary pastiches and the seriousness of its social and historical points. The overall tone of the book is completely infectious. Its characters are very frank and funny about their motivations. It's the kind of book in which someone says, "Oh, my damnable sexual appetites have got me into this mess." They announce that if there is a bastard, they announce themselves as a bastard immediately. There is no sort of unraveling their misdeeds or their seedy motivations. It's a technique that's both wonderfully funny, but also works well to compress the plot machinations, which it borrows from sort of Gothic novels that you imagine being 900 pages long, and miraculously produces this very slim comic gem. Yeah, if you've seen the movie and you're wondering if the book's worth reading, it very much is, and I'll shortly make a quick video just comparing the book and the film, which I've now seen. And finally, I wanted to talk to you about Open the Door. This is a book by Katherine Carwell, originally published in 1920. If you've listened to my podcasts on Robert Burns, you might have heard me mention Katherine Carwell. I never pass up an opportunity to say how much I enjoy her biography of Robert Burns. She's probably best known for her second novel, She only wrote 2, called The Chamomile. This is her first novel, which I'd never read before. This is a coming-of-age story of a young woman called Joanna Bannerman, born in Glasgow, and her adventures abroad and away from the city, her eventual return, her series of relationships in which she develops sexually as well as spiritually. In that sense, it was a very funny and completely accidental choice of book to read after reading Poor Things, which is about a reborn 25-year-old woman who sort of speedruns a development, both of a conscience, but also awareness of the physical world, the political world. This is a much more traditional story of a woman's development and finding her place in the world. I found it not quite as memorable as Carswell's other books. It's a slower book, it's much more meditative. For the most part, it's a work of realism, touched with moments that seem sort of semi-supernatural. Carswell lingers over moments that feel like Joanna witnessing clairvoyance or actually channeling some kind of clairvoyance. Moments in life that feel spooky, that feel like there is some kind of higher spiritual framework or sympathetic magic at play in the universe. Those were really wonderfully done. They didn't advertise themselves. They didn't sort of feel at all evangelical or anything like that. They were just moments of ordinary magic, moments that you all observe those in life. Whether or not you believe there is something to them or not is another matter. But they were just wonderfully done, and they kind of gave this whole book a kind of gust of something really memorable and distinctive. Just to round this video out, I thought I'd just read you a quick passage from it so you get a sense of Carswell's writing. There's some beautiful nature writing throughout the book, and this is one of the moments that I enjoyed the most. And autumn, even more than spring, is disturbing to those who give themselves readily to nature's impulses. For if in spring we are pierced by the innumerable points of flame which dart skywards from the ground, in autumn our senses are more subtly assailed. For passion's sake, then, the earth is laying aside her ornaments. There is a new restlessness and rapture of bird life, a new sense of disquiet and elation. The wooded places are full of the intoxicating smoulder of fecundity. On this November evening, traces of a recent hail shower still gleamed on the black railings, on the slopes of grass, on the dark boled trees, each standing in the circle of its own lovely droppings. The naked sky, lofty and compassionate, flung its arch over a glittering world. And in that arch, incredibly remote, ineffably pure, hung the pale waxing moon like a beaker of fretted silver. So yes, there you have it, Open the Door by Katherine Carwell. That brings us to the end of this week's books. Until next time, happy reading.